He woke to a sound that didn't belong to dreams. A faint tapping against glass, steady like rain. When he opened his eyes, light swam across the ceiling, pale and distant. The world came to him in slow pieces, the smell of smoke and medicine, the sting in his throat, the weight of bandages pressing against his skin. He tried to move but his arms felt heavy. His breath came short and uneven. Somewhere close by, a quiet voice murmured something, then the scrape of a chair followed. He turned his head, pain flashing across his skull. The voice belonged to a woman, a nurse perhaps, her face framed by tired gray eyes. She helped him drink from a metal cup. The water tasted like life, sharp and clean. He wanted to ask where he was, what had happened, but the words didn't come. The nurse only said he had been found unconscious near the eastern line after a shelling. He had no papers, no weapon, just a single tag around his neck. His name, she said, was Eric Bauer. The name sounded unfamiliar, like something borrowed. When the nurse left, he lay staring at the ceiling until the light began to fade. The hum of distant machinery echoed through the hall, and once or twice he heard someone groan in the next bed. He closed his eyes and tried to summon a single memory, a face, a place, even a sound, but his mind was blank, like a burned photograph. Night came slowly, carrying the faint scent of rain through the broken window. He thought of nothing and everything at once, drifting between dreams that felt too real and memories that didn't belong to him. In one of them he was standing in a field, holding something warm and small, a child maybe, but when he tried to see the face, smoke covered everything. By morning he could sit up. The room was small, the walls stained from damp air. There were 4 beds in total. 2 men were missing arms, one had his eyes covered in bandages. They breathed like broken machines. On the floor beside his bed lay a uniform folded neatly, gray and torn, with a dark red stain near the shoulder. Boots caked with dried mud rested below it. He stared at them a long while before touching them, as if they might remember what he couldn't. The nurse returned with a bowl of thin soup. She told him it was the year 1944 and that the hospital was far from the front. The war, she said, still burned across half the continent, though here the hills kept the noise away. He listened, though her words meant little. The idea of war felt distant and hollow, like a story told about strangers. He spent days watching light move across the walls, marking time by its rhythm. The nurse said recovery would take weeks. But she didn't speak much beyond that. Silence seemed to fill every corner of this place, as if sound itself had been rationed. When he began to walk again, the nurse brought him a small box found among his belongings. Inside was a photograph, a pocket watch, and the same metal tag she had read his name from. The photograph showed a woman and a small boy standing near a lake. Their smiles were soft and real, the kind that come from ordinary days. He studied the boy's face, searching for something that might unlock him, but nothing came. The watch still ticked faintly, though the glass was cracked. He held it close to his ear and listened to the rhythm, steady and stubborn, like a heart that refused to stop. That night he dreamed again. The boy from the photograph was there, running through tall grass, calling out. The words were swallowed by thunder and smoke. When Eric tried to run after him, the ground turned to ash beneath his feet. He woke before dawn, his chest tight and damp with sweat. The nurse found him sitting upright, eyes wide. She said nothing, only placed her hand briefly on his arm before leaving. Days became weeks. His strength returned, but not his memory. Outside the hospital, the field stretched wide and empty. The air was sharp and wet, the trees black against the gray sky. From the hilltop he could see the faint smoke of trains crossing the valley, thin, ghostly trails moving east. The world seemed strangely peaceful for a time of war. He often wondered how much death it took to make a silence this deep. Once, while wandering near the back of the grounds, he found a small chapel built from cracked stone. Its doors hung crooked, and a single candle burned inside beside a table covered with bundles of old letters. The air smelled of wax and dust. A woman's handwriting covered most of them, careful and looping. He began reading one without thinking. It spoke of a husband named Eric, a promise to return before winter, a boy who waited each night by the window. He stopped halfway through, his hands shaking. He searched the rest of the pile, hoping for more letters addressed to the same name, but there were only a few, each written months apart, the ink fading with time. Whoever had sent them had kept believing he was alive. When he stepped back into the cold, he felt something shift inside him. The letters were proof of a life that might have been his, or someone else's entirely. But the ache in his chest told him it mattered. Weeks later an officer arrived at the hospital. His boots echoed down the hall like gunfire. He walked from bed to bed, marking names on a clipboard. When he reached Eric's, he looked him over with the flat eyes of a man counting supplies. The nurse said quietly that Eric's memory hadn't returned, that he was still weak. The officer barely listened. He said every man who could stand belonged back at the line. After he left, the nurse warned him to keep pretending to recover slowly. She said some things were better left forgotten. That night, Eric sat by the window again. The rain had stopped, leaving the fields silver under the moon. He thought of the photograph, of the woman's letters, of the boy running through the field of his dreams. Somewhere between them was the truth, waiting like a ghost behind glass. He didn't know if he was running from what he had done or searching for what he had lost. But he knew the past was coming for him, one way or another. As he held the cracked watch to his ear again, its steady ticking filled the room like a heartbeat, the only sound alive in a world that had forgotten how to breathe. The morning he left the hospital was gray and hollow. Clouds pressed low over the hills, and the air smelled of rain and coal. The nurse gave him a coat, a small bag of bread, and the photograph he couldn't stop staring at. Her face showed something like worry, though she didn't say much. "You're sure?" she asked quietly as he stepped toward the gate. He nodded. "If I stay, I'll never remember." She hesitated, then handed him a small folded paper. "The address on this was with your things. Maybe it means something." He looked at it, tracing the faded ink. A street name, a town he didn't recognize. He thanked her and walked away before she could change his mind. The road stretched endlessly between gray fields and empty houses. Each one looked the same, broken windows, doors hanging open, roofs half collapsed. Somewhere far off, artillery rumbled like a storm trapped beneath the earth. He walked until his legs burned, stopping only when the rain began to fall again. He found shelter in an old barn, its walls cracked, the hay inside damp but soft enough to rest on. As he lay there, the photograph slipped from his coat pocket. The faces of the woman and the boy watched him through the flickering light of a dying lantern. He whispered their names though he didn't know them, letting the sound fill the silence. The names came out wrong, uncertain, but it made him feel less alone. By the next evening, he reached the town written on the paper. It wasn't much of a town anymore, just a collection of burned houses and half-standing walls. A church steeple leaned crookedly over the square, its bell long gone. Smoke still rose from somewhere beyond the hill. He asked around, though few people lingered. Those who did avoided soldiers, even ones out of uniform. An old man sitting by a well looked up when Eric approached. His face was thin and cracked like dry wood. "Do you know this place?" Eric asked, showing him the address. The old man squinted, then nodded slowly. "That's near the lake. Or what's left of it." He pointed down the road, where the trees grew thick and blackened from old fire. Eric walked in that direction until the town fell behind him. The road curved past twisted fences and a line of birch trees. After some time, he saw water through the branches, still and pale under the cloudy sky. The lake from the photograph. He froze at the sight. The edges were burned, as if the forest around it had caught fire long ago. Charred remains of a small house stood near the shore. The ground was littered with rusted tools and fragments of furniture half buried in the mud. He walked slowly through the ruins, each step sinking into soft earth. Inside what had once been a doorway, he found a piece of wood with a child's carving on it, a small figure with stick arms, smiling beside a taller one. The knife marks were shallow and uneven. He knelt there for a long time. The wind moved across the lake, bringing with it a faint echo of laughter that might have once belonged to the people in the picture. He could see them now in his mind, the woman hanging laundry in the sun, the boy chasing her shadow, the smell of bread from the open window. It was almost real, almost warm. Then came a flash of something else, a soldier standing in the doorway, shouting orders, the sound of boots and smoke filling the air. The memory hit like a blow. He stumbled back and pressed his hands to his head. Fragments of sound broke through, screams, fire, and his own voice shouting something he didn't want to remember. When the vision passed, he found himself sitting in the mud, shaking. He looked at the ruins again and felt something hollow open inside him. Maybe this had been his home. Or maybe it was where everything had ended. He spent that night in the remains of the house, listening to the wind move through the holes in the roof. The moon came out for a short while, silvering the water. He held the photograph up against the night sky and whispered, "Who were you?" No answer came, but something about the silence felt different, closer, almost listening. By morning, he decided to find out more. The nearest village still had a small church that hadn't been destroyed. Inside, a young priest swept the broken glass from the floor. He looked up as Eric entered. "You're from the front?" the priest asked cautiously. "I don't know," Eric said. "I used to be someone from here, maybe." "Eric Bauer." The priest paused, then frowned slightly. "That name I know. The Bauers lived by the lake. A wife and child. But they were gone when the soldiers came through. Nobody stayed." He looked at Eric carefully. "You say you're him?" "I don't remember," Eric said. The priest's face softened. "Maybe that's a mercy." Eric stayed silent. The priest went on sweeping. The scrape of the broom echoed through the empty church. Before leaving, Eric asked if anyone had survived from that area. The priest thought for a moment, then told him about a woman living a few villages north who had once worked with the Bauers. Maybe she would know something. He traveled north for 2 days, sleeping in barns and abandoned sheds. The countryside was littered with silence, fields left unharvested, roads split by bomb craters, trees stripped bare. He wondered how many others were wandering like him, half alive and half forgotten. On the 3rd day, he found the house the priest had mentioned. A woman opened the door. Her face was lined with years, her hair pinned back tightly, but her eyes carried something sharp, recognition, maybe. She studied him without speaking. Then she stepped aside to let him in. The room smelled of wood smoke and herbs. A single photograph sat on the mantel, a younger version of herself beside a group of villagers. Eric tried to find words. "Do you remember the Bauers? The ones by the lake?" The woman nodded slowly. "I remember." He hesitated. "Do you remember him?" She looked at him for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "I do." She sat down and motioned for him to do the same. The chair creaked under his weight. "They were good people," she said quietly. The wife, Anna, was kind. Their boy was named Lucas. He liked drawing in the dirt by the water. Then the soldiers came through. They said they were looking for deserters. Your name was among them. The words landed heavy in the air. Eric's hands tightened around his knees. Deserters? She nodded. You left your post. Tried to hide your family before they found you. But they came anyway. He felt the room sway. The memory that had been buried deep began to surface again, boots outside the door, the boy crying, fire lighting up the walls. He had run back too late. The woman watched him with pity. When they left, they burned everything. Some said they shot you too, but no one found a body. Eric closed his eyes. The faces from the photograph blurred in his mind. The woman, the boy, the sound of their laughter before the gunfire drowned it out. He stood up slowly, his body trembling. "Thank you," he said, barely more than a whisper. The woman nodded. "If forgetting was a gift, maybe you shouldn't have come back." He left before sunset, the air cold against his face. The road stretched empty before him, and behind him the sky burned faintly red. He walked without aim, past the lake once more, past the ruins of his home. He stopped at the water's edge and watched the reflection of clouds drift across its surface. Somewhere beneath that water, he imagined the echoes of a life that once had meaning. He pulled the cracked pocket watch from his coat. The ticking had grown weaker, slower. He opened the back and saw a small inscription engraved inside. "For E.B., so you never lose time with us." He stood there for a long time, the words sinking into him like rain into dry ground. He didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry for. As night fell, he lit a small fire among the ruins. The wind carried the smoke softly across the water. He spoke quietly into the flames, his voice calm, steady, certain. "I remember now." Then he set the photograph down beside the fire and watched as it curled into ash. For the first time since waking in that white room, he felt something close to peace. The war had taken everything from him, even his memory, but in its silence he had found the truth, and with it, the last pieces of the man he used to be. The forest thinned by morning light. The mist that had clung to the trees lifted and revealed the remnants of a small village spread like bones beneath the cold sky. He walked slowly down the slope, the rifle strap cutting into his shoulder, the smell of damp earth and smoke mixing with something sweeter, the faint scent of decay carried by the wind. Each step felt like stepping into someone else's dream. Houses were hollow shells, doors torn away, windows staring like empty eyes. A child's doll lay face down in the mud, its porcelain cheek cracked in two. The silence pressed against his chest like weight. He didn't know why he had come here, only that something inside had pulled him in this direction since dawn. The nurse's words from the night before still echoed faintly in his head, fragments of a memory he could not hold still. She had said something about the truth being in the ruins, or perhaps she hadn't said it at all and he had only imagined it. Memory played tricks, folding itself into lies that felt real. He passed a broken cart, its wheels split, and touched the wooden frame as if it might tell him something. Nothing did. Only the wind replied, whistling through gaps in burnt beams. At the center of the village stood a small church, its roof collapsed, its bell tower leaning sideways like a tired soldier. The door was missing. He stepped inside and the air changed, colder, stiller, full of old prayers. Sunlight streamed through a jagged hole in the wall, lighting the dust that danced in the air. Rows of pews were splintered, the altar blackened by fire. And then he saw it, half buried under debris, a framed photograph, glass shattered but the image mostly intact. A man in uniform stood beside a woman holding a small child. The man's face stopped him cold. It was his face. He knelt slowly, heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He touched the glass with trembling fingers and stared at the woman. Her smile was soft and familiar, her hair tied back, her eyes bright. The child couldn't have been more than 5. Something deep inside him stirred, a pain older than wounds or fear, a recognition too sharp to bear. He wanted to scream but no sound came. He pressed his forehead against the frame and the world tilted around him, as if everything was breaking apart and falling inward. When he stood again the photograph slipped from his hand and landed face down on the stone floor. He looked around the ruined church and it felt alive, whispering, pulling him deeper into the truth he had tried not to find. Behind the altar there was a narrow doorway leading into a small room. He pushed through the broken wood and found shelves of books and candles melted into puddles of wax. On the floor lay another set of photographs, scattered like fallen leaves. Faces of people he didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. Villagers. Men, women, children. All staring straight at the camera with expressions caught between fear and disbelief. On the back of one was written in faded ink, "For Captain Eric Bauer, July 1943. He froze. That name. Eric Bauer. It echoed through him like thunder. He knew it. He had heard someone call that name in a dream, in a scream, or maybe on a battlefield. He looked again at the faces, then at his reflection in a piece of shattered glass beside them. The eyes looking back at him were hollow, rimmed with shadows, but beneath them, beneath the exhaustion, he saw the same face from the photographs. The truth came like fire. He was the captain. The man these people feared. The man whose soldiers had burned this village. He stumbled back, breath shaking. The room seemed to spin around him. For a moment he couldn't tell whether he was standing or falling. He remembered flashes now, snow, gunfire, the cry of a woman, his own voice shouting orders. The faces of his men, the flames rising higher. He saw the child running into the smoke and himself turning away. Then darkness. Always darkness. He had wanted to forget. He had chosen to forget. Somewhere in the chaos of retreat and blood and broken command, his mind had buried the man he used to be. Outside, the sky had grown brighter, almost cruelly bright. He walked out of the church carrying nothing but the memory that had come back to life inside him. The wind tugged at his coat and the air carried the smell of spring trying to grow through ashes. He sat on the church steps, staring at his hands. They looked like any man's hands, strong, scarred, steady. But now they felt cursed. He thought of the nurse back in the camp, her quiet face, the way she looked at him not with hatred but with sorrow, as if she already knew. Maybe she had always known. Maybe everyone had known except him. For a long time he sat there without moving, his mind heavy with the weight of what could never be undone. A small bird landed near his foot, tilting its head, pecking at the ground. Life still moved, stubborn and indifferent. He watched it until the trembling in his fingers stopped. Somewhere deep inside him, a decision began to form, clear and simple. He couldn't rewrite the past, but he could walk toward it, face it, instead of hiding in the empty spaces of his mind. He rose and began to walk again. The path led down toward a river that wound through the valley, its surface glimmering under the pale sun. He followed it until he saw another figure standing on the bank, a woman in a worn coat, her hair tied back, carrying a bundle of cloth. For a moment he thought he was seeing a ghost. She turned when she heard his steps and her eyes widened in shock. It was the nurse. She had followed him, maybe knowing where he would go. She looked at him for a long moment, her lips parting as if to speak, then she said quietly, "You remember now." He nodded once. That was all. They stood together in silence, the river whispering between them. After a while she unwrapped the bundle and revealed the same photograph he had found in the church, the one of the man, woman, and child. "You left this here," she said softly. "You told me once, before the amnesia, that you would come back when the war inside you was over. I didn't believe you." Her voice broke slightly, but she steadied it. "Now you know what you were running from." He looked at the picture, then at her. "I don't deserve to remember," he said. She shook her head. "No one does. But remembering is the only way it ends." She placed the photograph in his hands and turned toward the river, staring at the reflection of the sky in the water. For a long time neither spoke. Then she walked away, her figure fading into the trees until she was gone. He watched until there was nothing left but the sound of the river and the beating of his own heart. He stood there for what felt like hours, the photograph pressed to his chest, the wind cold against his skin. Slowly he knelt by the edge of the river and laid the picture on the surface. The water caught it gently and carried it downstream, spinning it once before pulling it away into the current. He watched it drift until it disappeared around the bend. Then he looked at his reflection in the water. The man staring back wasn't a soldier or a captain or a ghost. He was just a man stripped bare by memory, neither hero nor monster, but something in between. The sound of distant thunder rolled across the hills though the sky was clear. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe it was the echo of a war that refused to die completely. He turned away from the river and began walking back toward the horizon, his steps slow but steady. Each one felt like a confession. The sun climbed higher, warming his back, and the shadows behind him grew shorter. By the time the church disappeared from view, the world around him was alive with the sound of birds and the whisper of wind through grass. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, but for the first time since he had opened his eyes in that hospital bed he felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, that was too much to ask, but peace in knowing that he could finally stop running from the truth. His memories were scars, but they were his to bear, not to hide. As he walked, he thought of the faces in the photographs, the people he would never meet again, and the small life they might have had if not for men like him. He thought of the nurse and her quiet strength. He thought of the river carrying the image of the man he used to be. The world was moving forward, and so would he, even if each step carried the weight of the past. When night came he found a small clearing beneath an oak tree and sat down, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. The wind was gentle, almost kind. He closed his eyes and for the first time in years, maybe in his whole life, he didn't dream of war. He simply rested, his mind quiet, his heart steady, as the world turned slowly around him. And in that silence, beneath the wide sky, the man who had forgotten the war finally remembered what it meant to be human.